She was a female mechanic from a quiet rural town who traded everything: her truck, her tools, even her savings for a rusted old airplane that hadn't touched the sky in over 40 years. Everyone called it a lost cause. But what she built from that wreck wasn't just a machine, it was a message. A true inspirational story about second chances, unfinished dreams, and the kind of flight that doesn't begin in the air, but deep in the heart. Subscribe for more stories that lift you up, and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Let's get started. Charlotte stood at the edge of the sun-baked dirt field behind her late uncle's shed, arms folded tightly across her chest, watching the flatbed trailer lower what looked like a wrecked war relic. The old biplane didn't just look broken, it looked buried by time. Its frame was rusted through, wings slumped, fabric torn like paper in the wind. But Charlotte didn't blink. She had emptied her savings, sold her beloved pickup, pawned every tool she owned just to get it here. People in Cedar Ridge thought she'd lost her damn mind. A woman with no formal training, no garage, no fallback plan, and now a piece of scrap that hadn't touched the sky since the 70s. But Charlotte saw something different. She always had. The shed had once been her uncle's workshop, where he let her hand him wrenches before she could even spell the word socket. After he died, the place went silent, collecting dust and regrets. Until today. She shoved the creaky doors open. The scent of oil and old pine slammed into her chest like a memory. As the plane touched down, Charlotte stepped forward, rested her palm on its battered wing, and whispered, "You and me, we've both been grounded too long. Let's change that." 3 days after she hauled the broken plane into the shed, Charlotte's hands were covered in grime, her arms aching from twisting bolts that hadn't budged since the Carter administration. She worked through dusk and deep into the night, guided only by a flickering overhead bulb and an old country blues station hissing from a dusty radio, one her uncle used to whistle along with. But that night, it wasn't static that broke the silence. It was a knock. 3 short taps on the tin door. Then nothing. Charlotte wiped her hands on her jeans, tucked her braid under her cap, and cracked the door open. A man stood outside mid-60s, tall and wiry, with sun-cracked skin and a face that looked carved from wind and time. His eyes weren't on her. They were locked on the airplane. "Where'd you dig up that old bird?" he asked, voice low and scratchy like boots on gravel. "Bought her off a guy up in Painted Creek," Charlotte replied, guarded. "Why?" The man stepped forward cautiously, like the aircraft might disappear if he blinked. "Because I know her. He said, my brother built that plane." Charlotte stared. "Come again." He nodded slowly, eyes still tracing every curve of the fuselage. She was called Willow Hawk. Me and my brother. Russell, he was the designer. I was just the grease monkey. She was supposed to take us away from here, but life had other plans. He reached into his canvas jacket and pulled out a cracked leather pouch. Inside, a brittle flight journal, its spine taped together, pages filled with hand-drawn diagrams and careful notations. Tucked into the front cover was an old photo, 2 young men grinning beside the same plane when it gleamed like morning. "My name's Elliot," he said. Voice soft. "Russ passed a few years back, gave the plane away before then. Thought she was too far gone to save. But I never forgot her." Charlotte turned the pages, tracing the ink with trembling fingers. "She's not dead. Not all the way." Elliot gave a faint smile, then pulled out a folded sheet of pale blue paper. Russ worked on this for years. It's a design mod, new rudder linkage. Better control in crosswinds. FAA wouldn't touch it. Called it too experimental. But if you're serious? Charlotte unfolded the paper. It was brilliant messy in the way genius often is. Lines curved across the page like veins. Handwritten notes danced in the margins. That night, she didn't sleep. She laid the blueprint across her workbench like scripture. The handwriting matched the flight log. Every scratch of graphite carried Russell's voice, decades old, but unshaken. At dawn, she made a pot of black coffee and sat beneath the fuselage, legs crossed, eyes scanning the plans over and over. The tail was rotted out, control surfaces seized, engine an old Franklin six-cylinder completely frozen. But her heart, it was on fire. By noon, she was halfway to a machine shop 2 towns over, run by a gruff old welder named Caleb Jenkins. He'd once shown her how to TIG weld when she was 16 and angry at the world. "You rebuilding this antique?" he asked, squinting at the design sketch. "What is this, a bet or a breakdown?" "Neither," she said. "It's a promise." Caleb stared at the blueprint. "This is madness. But it's beautiful. Can you help?" "I'll cut what you need," he said, turning to his plasma cutter. "But if it crashes and burns, I was never here." "Deal." Back at the shed, Charlotte chalked out markings on the frame, labeled every point of stress and wear. Her fingers blistered, her lower back screamed. But she didn't stop. Every bolt she removed felt like peeling back a secret someone had buried. 2 days later, a lanky teenager wandered in. Shy eyes, nervous posture, a welding helmet dangling from one arm. Clearly too big for him. "I heard you're fixing up a plane," he stammered. "I don't know much, but I want to learn. I pick things up quick." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "You know how to sweep a floor?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Start there." He smiled so wide it broke something inside her. "My name's Max." Max became her shadow. He showed up at sunrise, stayed until she kicked him out at dusk. Quiet, focused, asking questions like every answer might be the key to unlocking his future. Word spread, not online, not through ads, just whispered from one person to the next. By the end of the week, Georgia from the hardware store dropped off a box of aviation bolts. On the house, she winked. She belongs in the sky. Miss Harper from the diner started bringing sandwiches and black coffee every noon. "You can't weld on an empty stomach," she said. Even the town preacher stopped by. "You come to bless the project?" Charlotte asked. "No," he said, placing a weathered hand on the wing strut. "I came to witness it." The shed changed. It wasn't a workshop anymore. It became a forge for broken machines, forgotten dreams, and second chances. Elliot came by often, sometimes with vintage parts, sometimes just stories. He told Charlotte about Russell's heartbreak. He built Willowhawk to fly to her. Elliot said one night, to tell her what he never could. But when the FAA grounded the plane, he grounded himself too. Charlotte ran her fingers along the blueprint. He didn't fail. He just paused. One night, she found something wedged under the pilot's seat, a tin box wrapped in wax cloth. Inside a small letter, a brass compass pendant, and a metal tag engraved with coordinates. The letter, in shaky, fading ink, read, "If you found this, maybe you're brave enough to finish what I couldn't." This plane wasn't just about flying. It was about healing. I designed something that could lift more than weight. It could lift regret. Charlotte sat with it for a long time, hands trembling. She wasn't just rebuilding a machine anymore. She was completing someone's unfinished goodbye. And for the first time in years, she cried not from sadness, but from the burden of hope. She didn't want to fix the plane anymore. She needed to... The morning after Charlotte discovered Russell's hidden letter and compass, the old shed seemed to shift, not physically, but in presence like the air inside had taken a breath. The dust didn't hang heavy anymore. The silence wasn't hollow. There was movement now, and meaning. She pinned the letter on the back wall beside the blueprint. The coordinates from the metal tag were carefully etched into her notebook, beneath a single word. Someday. In the following days, Max grew sharper, more precise. He still tripped over wires and asked too many questions, but his curiosity had turned into discipline. Charlotte had started teaching him about torque specs, rudder trim tabs, and fuel flow regulators. He absorbed it all with the hunger of someone who knew this was his shot. One late afternoon, after 14 hours of grinding aluminum and rewiring the main harness, Charlotte leaned back and whispered to herself, "We might actually pull this off." Then the phone rang. She was in the middle of sealing a microfracture on a wing spar when it buzzed, "Unknown number." She wiped her hands on her shirt and answered. "Hello?" The voice was clipped, bureaucratic. "Is this Charlotte Rivers?" "Yes." "This is Raymond Holt, Federal Aviation Administration. We've received a report regarding an unauthorized rebuild of a vintage aircraft believed to be experimental, with undocumented modifications." "That accurate?" Charlotte's heart dropped. "It's a restoration. The original logs are intact. The modifications were part of a prototype design from the builder documented. We'll need to conduct an immediate on-site inspection." Click. The line went dead. She stood frozen, fingers wrapped tight around the phone, the hum of the welder still going in the background. Someone had reported her. That night, the shed was too quiet. Max swept the floor in silence, sneaking glances her way but not asking. He didn't need to. The tension was thick. The next morning, a white SUV rolled into the gravel lot, its hood dust-covered but the government plates unmistakable. A man in a pressed gray suit stepped out, clipboard in one hand, mirrored sunglasses. No handshake. No smile. Raymond Holt. He walked the perimeter of the aircraft slowly, tapping the wing struts, peering at rivet lines, inspecting everything like he was waiting for something to disqualify. Charlotte stood by the shed doors, arms crossed. Elliot arrived halfway through, leaned against the doorway, said nothing. After an hour of meticulous prodding, Holt finally turned to her. "This aircraft contains non-standard modifications. The rudder control system appears custom-built. That's a red flag." Charlotte handed him the blueprint and flight journal. All documented, original builder's work. He scanned them briefly. No reaction. "You'll need to file Form 8130-12, submit for experimental classification, and pass full FAA test verification with a certified inspector." She gritted her teeth. "That'll take months." "Maybe longer," he said flatly. "Until then, the aircraft is grounded." Then he turned, got in his SUV, and left, leaving behind only silence and the smell of exhaust. Charlotte collapsed onto the steps of the shed, staring at the plane. "We're grounded," she muttered. Elliot sat beside her, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't mean you stop. Just means you find another path." She scoffed. "That kind of certification I sold half my shop just to buy that bird? I can't afford the process." Elliot looked out across the field. "Then do what Russ did. Build anyway. Without permission. With faith." Something shifted in her that night. Not rage, not fear. Something quieter, more dangerous. Resolve. She unrolled Russell's blueprint again, tracing every sketched line like a prayer. He hadn't stopped because the system told him no. He stopped because he ran out of strength to keep saying yes. She wouldn't let that happen to her. The next morning, Max found her already working. Eyes bloodshot, cap askew, but her hands steady as stone. "We still going?" he asked. She didn't look up, now more than ever. She called in every favor, drove to junkyards 5 counties out, welded with borrowed gas and salvaged steel. That afternoon, Georgia from the hardware store showed up again with a visitor. A short, wiry man in his 70s, wearing a dusty ball cap and carrying a worn-out toolbox. "This is Wes," Georgia said. "He's retired FA, built crop dusters in the 80s. Wes looked over the blueprint with a grunt and a nod. "This is nuts," he said, "and brilliant. I like it." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Will you help certify it?" "I'll oversee the rebuild and the paperwork. Pro bono," he said. "Someone gave me a shot once. Time to return the favor." Word spread again. This time faster. A local farmer dropped off sheets of aluminum. A retired electrician brought old avionics tools. The town library hosted a Flight and Fix fundraiser raffling off vintage plane models and books to buy parts. But the biggest surprise came one autumn afternoon. As the sun dipped behind the oaks, a woman walked into the shed, quiet as the wind. Mid-50s, silver-streaked braid, eyes soft, but heavy with something unsaid. She didn't introduce herself, just stepped up to the plane and gently laid her hand on the fuselage. "I heard she still had some breath left in her." Charlotte froze. "You knew Russell?" The woman nodded. "I was the reason he built her." Silence. "I didn't know," Charlotte said. "She was everything he couldn't say to me," the woman whispered. "He flew her once over my father's farm. I saw him up there, and I knew." Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. "He never landed." "No," the woman said, "but maybe you can—" She handed Charlotte an envelope. Inside, an old photo. Russell, young, laughing beside the plane as it shimmered like silver. On the back, in faded ink, "She was always meant to fly." That night, Charlotte pinned the photo beside the blueprint. She touched it gently, then whispered, "Then let's give her wings." The photo Mara had given her never left the workbench. Every morning, Charlotte paused before picking up her tools, letting her eyes rest on Russell's face, the joy in his smile, the shine on Willowhawk's original frame. It wasn't just a snapshot. It was a freeze frame of purpose, something Charlotte hadn't let herself feel in a long time. But something had changed. Before, the project had been a challenge, a dare, a gauntlet thrown down by time and rust. Could she make it fly? Could she silence the doubters? Could she prove she wasn't crazy? Now, none of that mattered. Now, it was about finishing a story that deserved an ending. She began to treat every part of the plane differently, not like metal, not like chores, but like memory. When she removed a bolt, she whispered a thank you. When she sanded corrosion from a control arm, she handled it like it was bone. Even Max noticed. "You okay?" he asked one afternoon, watching her polish a spinner cone with an almost meditative touch. "Yeah," she said softly. "I just think I was building with fire before. But maybe she needs something gentler now." Elliot, seated in his usual folding chair with a thermos of sweet tea, grinned. Fire gets things moving, but it's love that keeps them in the air. The days stretched, and the rebuild deepened. Charlotte started seeing the aircraft not as a project, but as a living thing. The rivets became stitches, the fuel lines arteries, the wings ribs of a dream long buried. And the cockpit wasn't just where someone sat. It was where someone dared to believe again. Willowhawk wasn't just metal anymore. She had breath. And everyone who entered that shed felt it, even the skeptical ones. One Sunday, a yellow school bus rolled up to the edge of the field. Charlotte, holding a socket wrench, watched it stop with a hiss. The door opened, and out spilled a wave of teenage girls. Notebooks, goggles, ponytails, all of them wide-eyed. Behind them was Mrs. Jensen, the high school science teacher from Pine Bluff. "They're doing a unit on lift and thrust," she explained. "I told them your story." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. What story? The one everyone's watching quietly. Mrs. Jensen said, whether you meant to or not, you became someone worth learning from. Charlotte had never thought of herself as a teacher. She barely made it through school herself. But as the girls wandered through the shop, asking about airfoils and yaw control, something clicked. When one of them, Lana, age 13, asked, "Could I be a mechanic too?" Charlotte knelt down and said, "You can be anything that keeps your hands too busy to give up." That night, she stared at the photo of Russell again. And this time, she smiled. By the following weekend, Charlotte had started an informal program called Saturdays at the Shed. No sign-up, no fees, just a promise anyone who wanted to learn could come. Some girls brought notebooks, others brought scars. A few just swept the floor and asked quiet questions. All of them left a little straighter, a little louder, a little more certain that they belonged. By week 6, Willowhawk didn't look like a corpse anymore. The fuselage had been restructured with aircraft-grade aluminum. The custom rudder linkage modified from Russell's original drawing was installed and functional. The tail was sleek and strong, gleaming in the late afternoon sun like it had been reborn from moonlight and sweat. Even Wes, the retired FAA mechanic, stood in awe. I've seen rebuilds. I've seen warbird restorations. But this, he tapped the frame gently. This is resurrection. Charlotte laughed, wiping her brow. Glad you think so. We're almost there. She had just started routing the last of the avionics when she caught herself humming an old melody her uncle used to whistle while adjusting engine timing. She stopped mid-note and stared at the blueprint pinned on the wall. You see this? Russell, she whispered. We're almost home. But just as everything seemed to be lining up, another twist arrived. It was a Tuesday evening, sun dipping low behind the oaks, casting the shed in long golden shadows. Charlotte was alone, wiring the GPS interface when she heard Elliot's truck crunch onto the gravel. But he wasn't alone. From the passenger side stepped a woman early 40s. Crisp blazer, sharp haircut, clipboard in hand. Her heels clicked too confidently for a place held together by bolts and belief. Her name's Dana Vaughn, Elliot said under his breath, from the State Museum of Aviation. I didn't invite her, but she heard. Dana circled the plane slowly, tapping the wing with a manicured nail, scribbling notes on her clipboard. Do you realize how rare this is? She asked. This aircraft is a historical artifact. We'd love to preserve it glass enclosure, temperature-controlled gallery, informational displays. The works. Charlotte stiffened. She's not for display. Dana blinked. But you've poured your life into this. Don't you want people to see it? I want them to believe in it. That's what museums are for. No, Charlotte said, voice sharpening. Museums are where dreams go to be remembered. Willowhawk isn't a memory. She's a message. Dana squinted. You're planning to fly this? Yes. That's insane. Charlotte smiled faintly. That's why it matters. Dana left, shaking her head. Elliot stayed behind, arms folded. You said that so easy, he said. Because for the first time, Charlotte replied, I believe it. That night, when the shed was finally quiet again, Charlotte climbed into the cockpit. She rested her hands on the controls, closed her eyes, and let herself feel the weight of everything, every setback, every scar, every damn bolt that refused to turn. Then she whispered into the silence. You were never meant to be behind glass. You were meant to rise. The next morning, Max arrived to find a fresh stencil painted beneath the tail number. Flight is a kind of faith. He tilted his head. What's that mean? Charlotte looked up from the wiring harness, eyes tired but bright. Means we don't just build machines here. We build belief. The morning Charlotte rolled Willowhawk out of the shed, The town of Cedar Ridge held its collective breath. The sun hadn't yet broken the ridge, but neighbors had already begun arriving, folding chairs in hand, thermoses of coffee steaming in the autumn chill. For weeks, they'd driven past the old property and seen the flicker of late-night welds. They'd heard whispers in the diner and bait shop. That crazy plane might actually fly. And now here it was. Willowhawk stood in the gravel lot like something both ancient and brand new, reborn in matte cobalt. Her wings polished to a mirror sheen. Down the tail boom, beneath the FAA certified number, was the phrase Charlotte had chosen just days before. Flight is a kind of faith. Elliot was the first to walk up. He traced his fingers along the riveted panels, eyes damp. "She still looks like Russell," he murmured. "But she breathes like you." Charlotte gave a small, tight smile, her heartbeat thundering beneath her flannel shirt. "You think she'll lift?" Elliot shrugged. "You've already done the impossible. Everything after this is just altitude." Then Wes arrived, clipboard in hand, the final FAA sign-off. Charlotte followed him through the checklist control surface deflections, torque specs, pressure lines, throttle response. Everything passed. There was nothing left to check. She climbed into the pilot's seat, hands trembling as she gripped the yoke. The crowd stood silent, reverent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught. A low rumble vibrated through the ground. The prop spun. Slow. Then faster. And faster. The gravel beneath the skids began to shake. The wings jittered against their own anticipation. Charlotte eased the throttle forward. The wheels lifted. 6 inches, then 12, then 3 feet. The shed, the crowd, the field, they all grew smaller beneath her. She didn't push it, just hovered in place, then turned a slow arc around the edge of the lot. Not a flight, not yet. Just a promise kept. She landed softly. Silence cracked like glass. Then the cheering erupted. People clapped and shouted. Georgia tossed her ball cap into the air. Mrs. Jensen wiped tears behind her glasses. Even the local sheriff, who once told Charlotte she was probably violating at least 24 codes, stood applauding with both hands. Wes walked over, clipboard tucked under his arm. "You just made aviation history," he said. Voice shaking, in a backyard held together by rust and grit. Charlotte climbed down, face streaked with sweat and tears. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She just smiled. The next day, the local paper ran the headline, "Small-town mechanic brings dead aircraft back to life and flies it." By noon, it hit state news. By Friday, it went viral. But the most unexpected response came the following week. A letter, real paper, not an email. Embossed return address, State University of Colorado, School of Aviation and Engineering. Inside was an invitation. "We'd like you to speak at the Women in STEM Leadership Symposium next month. Your story is inspiring a generation. We'd be honored to host you." Charlotte held the envelope in both hands for nearly 10 minutes before she said a word. She hadn't stepped into a classroom since she was 18. She'd never once stood behind a podium. She built with her hands, not with credentials. Max noticed the hesitation. "You have to go," he said. "I'm not that kind of smart," she murmured. He shook his head. "You don't have to be. Just tell the truth. Tell them about the rust, the sleepless nights, the letter under the seat. Tell them you almost quit, but didn't. What if they ask for specs or data?" Max pointed to Willow Hawk, gleaming just outside the hangar door. "Then show them her. That's all the proof they need." That night, Charlotte stood alone in the shed, the compass pendant warm in her palm. The same coordinates still etched on the metal tag. Her gaze drifted toward the northeast horizon. "Someday," she exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll go." She didn't wear heels to the symposium. She wore boots, worn jeans, her leather gloves tucked in her back pocket, grease still under her fingernails. The auditorium was filled with scientists, engineers, pilots, and professors. Polished professionals in tailored suits and silk ties. Then there was Charlotte. When she stepped onto the stage, she didn't bring a PowerPoint. She brought a story. "I'm not the smartest person here," she began. "I barely passed algebra. I once used brake cleaner as hand soap. And I traded everything I had, my truck, my tools, my savings for a plane no one believed could fly." The crowd chuckled. But that plane wasn't just metal. It was memory. Someone's dream half buried, half built, but not done. And I didn't bring it back to life because I wanted fame. I brought it back because unfinished things deserve another shot. Her voice cracked. She didn't hide it. "I'm not here because I always knew what I was doing. I'm here because I didn't stop." When she stepped off stage, the room stood in ovation. Back in Cedar Ridge, the shed had a new name now: the Hangar of Second Chances. What started as a joke from Max stuck, because that's what it had become, a place where broken things weren't discarded. They were restored. Elliot visited every Sunday, bringing thermoses of bad coffee and boxes of old parts. Wes brought FAA manuals and weathered notebooks. Max. He was now Charlotte's official apprentice. But Charlotte wasn't the only one teaching anymore. The girls who came every Saturday, now numbering over a dozen, were learning to weld, to wire, to read schematics and respect torque charts. One of them, little Emma, once asked, "Do you think I could build something that flies one day?" Charlotte grinned. "I think you already are." More requests poured in: interviews, museum offers, documentaries. Charlotte declined most of them. She didn't want Willowhawk behind glass. She wanted her in the air. But one request stood out. A regional flight school offered to sponsor a scholarship program for girls in rural communities who wanted to build, fix, or fly. They wanted to name it after the plane that started it all. The Willowhawk Initiative. Charlotte signed the paperwork with calloused hands and misty eyes. "That name doesn't belong to me," she said. "It belongs to anyone who ever looked at a pile of rust and saw a second chance." And one evening, long after the crowds had faded, Charlotte took Willowhawk up again. No cameras, no spectators, just her and the sky. She followed the coordinates etched into the compass tag. Over forests, past rivers, through valleys lit by golden dusk. And then she saw it, a clearing, ringed with wild oaks. The place Russell could never quite land. The place where something had been left unfinished. She hovered low, pulled the compass from her pocket, and let it fall gently into the grass. No plaque, no words, just a whisper, "You made it." Then she rose. And this time, she didn't circle. She flew. The weather shifted. Autumn rolled in on a whisper of wind and golden light. The shed's tin roof groaned a little louder at night, and leaves scraped across the gravel lot like scattered chapters waiting to be read. The air held the weight of both endings and beginnings. Inside the hangar, Charlotte stood alone at her workbench, staring at a photograph now soft around the edges. Russell's smile. Willowhawk in her original shell. A moment once frozen in time, now brought back to life. But this morning felt heavier. "The phone rang," Charlotte answered, wiping oil from her fingers with the hem of her shirt. Charlotte Rivers, the voice on the line, asked, trembling. "Yes, this is Mara." Charlotte's heart sank. Silence hung like static. Then Mara spoke again, barely holding herself together. "I just got a call from the hospital. Elliot collapsed this morning." By the time Charlotte arrived, the sky was still dark. Hospital lights buzzed overhead as she rushed through sterile halls, finding Mara slouched in a vinyl chair, holding a paper coffee cup she hadn't sipped. "He was working on that old fuel trim log you gave him," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Said he wanted to help Max prep for his ground school test. Said he wasn't done yet." Charlotte nodded slowly, throat tight. "Can I see him?" Mara only nodded. Elliot lay still, wrapped in machines and blinking monitors. His chest rose with effort. His face, once so weathered and sharp, looked small now, frail. Charlotte pulled the flight log from her coat and sat beside him. "Remember this," she whispered, flipping to the first page. "You told me Russell never trusted memory. He scribbled every trim setting in the margins. I said I did the same, and you laughed. Said maybe that's why the plane ended up in my hands." She smiled faintly through tears. "You didn't just give me a blueprint. You gave me a reason." She traced her fingers across the logbook. "And now I'm not ready to say goodbye." Back at the hangar, the silence was unbearable. Max didn't speak much that day. He just worked, checked the rudder cables twice, readjusted the battery mounts, cleaned without being asked. "I don't like quiet," he muttered eventually. "Me neither," Charlotte said. That night, she walked the space alone, paused at each station, touched each tool Elliot had once used. His notes were still scribbled on the whiteboard, half a sentence left dangling. "It's not about the flight. It's about who you bring with you." The next morning, Mara waited outside the hospital with a folded piece of paper in her hand. "He gave this to me last week," she said. "Told me to give it to you if anything happened." Charlotte took it with shaking hands and opened it slowly. "Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means I've run out of sky. But don't you stop flying. Willowhawk might have been Russell's dream, but you gave her soul. That shed, it's not a workshop anymore. It's a lighthouse. And you became the fire. One more thing. Don't forget the coordinates. I know you carry them like Russell did. That compass was never meant to be buried. It was meant to find its way home. Take her there. Finish what he couldn't." Charlotte folded the letter to her chest and wept for Elliot, for Russell, for every story that had ever stopped short of the runway. A week later, the hangar held a memorial. Nothing formal, no black suits, no speeches. It was better. Max shaped a small plaque from an old aluminum panel, cut the edges smooth, used the etching tool by hand. When he was done, he handed it to Charlotte without a word. She read the inscription and swallowed the lump in her throat. Built from fire, flown by heart, remembered forever. Charlotte mounted it beside the original Rivers and Sons sign, the one her uncle had carved decades ago. For the first time, it felt complete. That night, she stood alone in the gravel lot. Willowhawk shimmered under the stars, quiet and waiting. "One last flight," Charlotte whispered. 2 days later, she filed a new flight plan, this time to the exact coordinates engraved on Russell's compass tag. Max handled the pre-flight checklist with quiet focus. Wes signed off the logbook without a word. Mara stood near the edge of the hangar, her scarf caught in the wind, her eyes watching every move. Charlotte climbed in. The engine turned over without hesitation, smooth, like it had been waiting. She lifted off. The town shrank below her, but her chest expanded with every mile. She flew across the farmlands, over winding rivers, through rust-colored canyons painted by the setting sun. And then she saw it. A wide clearing, encircled by oak trees, undisturbed, sacred. The place Russell had never landed. She hovered above it, then slowly descended. The grass swayed beneath her. Branches reached skyward in a kind of welcome. She stepped out and walked to the center, pulling 2 items from her flight jacket, Elliot's final letter and Russell's old compass. She knelt, placed them gently in the grass, and whispered, "Now you've both come home?" Back in Cedar Ridge, nothing went back to normal. It got better. The shed had evolved again, not just a hangar, not just a workshop. It became a program. Charlotte opened enrollment for weekend classes in aircraft restoration, fabrication, and flight theory. Within a month, she had 18 girls signed up and a waiting list. Max now taught introductory welding. Mara helped secure grants from an aviation foundation. And Charlotte? She no longer called herself just a mechanic. She was something more now, an interpreter of dreams, a builder of second chances, a keeper of legacies. And every Sunday, no matter the weather, Willowhawk sat at the edge of the field, glinting in the sun just in case someone needed to remember. Even forgotten things can fly again. The hangar of second chances hummed with life. A year had passed since Willowhawk's first flight, but the energy inside the old tin shed hadn't dimmed, it had deepened. The same tools still hung on the pegboard. The same coffee pot brewed bitter grounds each morning. And yes, the roof still leaked near the west corner. But something inside the space had changed. Charlotte had changed. Not in the way she dressed, she still wore scuffed boots and wiped grease on her jeans. Not in the way she worked, she still cursed at jammed bolts and refused to use torque wrenches unless absolutely necessary. But there was a steadiness in her now, a light that didn't flicker anymore. She had become someone people looked to not because she wanted it, but because she'd earned it. Yet some nights, after the sparks died down and Max locked the gate behind the last student, Charlotte still sat alone in Willowhawk's cockpit, hands resting on the controls, eyes closed, breathing in memories, not airspeed. One such night. The shed was quiet, save for the creaking of cooling engines and the occasional whisper of wind through loose rafters. The workbench was cluttered with sketches for a new rudder project. A set of safety goggles lay forgotten beside a sandwich no one had finished. Max had just left, promising to return early to help a new student with her first cut. Charlotte sat in the pilot's seat, running her fingers along the yoke. Above it, etched into the metal panel in small, careful script Max's handiwork, were the words, "Built from fire, flown by heart." She smiled, then looked up. A girl maybe 12 stood at the threshold of the hangar, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide with hesitation. Charlotte stood. "Hey there." The girl stepped inside slowly, the sound of her sneakers soft against the concrete. "Are you the lady who made the plane fly?" Charlotte chuckled. "That's what they say." The girl looked down, kicking at a bolt on the floor. "My brother says girls don't do stuff like that." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "You want to know a secret?" The girl nodded. "I didn't do it because someone told me I could. I did it because someone once told me I couldn't, and I got tired of waiting for permission." The girl blinked. "Can I see inside?" Charlotte walked over to Willowhawk and opened the side hatch. "Climb in? Let's get your hands dreaming." What had started as a passion project had become a movement. The Willowhawk initiative exploded. Weekend workshops turned into full-fledged mentorships. Girls came from all over small towns, big cities, farming communities. Some were driven in by their grandparents. Some took the bus alone. Some brought notebooks filled with sketches. Some brought silence and the hope of being seen. Veterans volunteered to teach. Retired engineers dusted off decades-old manuals. Local businesses donated shop supplies, tools, and even scholarships. The hangar was no longer just a space. It was a heartbeat. One warm spring morning. Charlotte stood outside with a cup of coffee, clipboard tucked under one arm. Mara joined her, watching through the open hangar doors as sparks flew behind welding curtains and laughter echoed off steel beams. "You ever think this would happen?" Mara asked. Charlotte exhaled. gaze fixed on a student installing her first rivet. Not once. But maybe Willowhawk was never just for Russell, or Elliot, or even me. Maybe she was waiting for all of them. Mara nodded. You didn't just rebuild a plane. You repaired something bigger. Charlotte took a sip. Yeah, a whole lot of us. That afternoon, Charlotte received a letter not from a sponsor or a publication or a university. It was from a 14-year-old girl named Janie. The handwriting was shaky, the envelope smudged. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of Willowhawk in flight. Beneath it, a sentence. Because of you, I think I can build something too. Charlotte folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same tin box where she kept Elliot's note and Russell's original compass tag. 3 voices. 3 echoes. Now living in the same legacy. That night, she wheeled Willowhawk to the edge of the field and took off again. No cameras. No crowd. Just her and the open sky. She flew low at first over newly green pastures, gliding above the river that sparkled like glass. She passed the old mill, the high school football field, the spot where Elliot used to sit and talk shop under the hood of his truck. Then she climbed, higher than she had before, past the low clouds, into blue so deep it felt like time paused. The controls buzzed gently under her hands. But she didn't tense. She smiled through the tears that filled her goggles, not from grief, but from something harder to name. Belonging. Because for the first time in her life, Charlotte wasn't just fixing someone else's dream. She was living her own. She returned at twilight. The sky dipped in amber and lavender. As Willowhawk touched down, Max met her at the hangar doors, carrying a new shipment of Clecos and heat-treated rivets. Where'd you go? He asked. Charlotte slid the canopy back. Nowhere. She paused, then added, and everywhere. Max frowned. I don't get it. Charlotte smiled, patting his shoulder. You will. Someday. Inside the hangar. The lights stayed on later than usual. Greasy pizza boxes stacked beside tool trays. Girls argued playfully over voltage numbers and cotter pins. Someone turned up the radio. Someone else shouted out torque specs from a flashcard. And Charlotte? She stood in the back, just far enough to see it all. The light reflecting off polished aluminum, the hum of knowledge being passed between calloused hands and eager fingers. She realized something then. Willowhawk was never meant to be locked behind glass. She was meant to be reborn again and again every time a girl picked up a wrench and said, "Why not me?" And that's when Charlotte knew. The plane wasn't the end of the story. She was just the beginning of someone else's. Some stories don't begin in the sky. They start on the ground, buried under rust, silence, and the kind of grief that lingers in the corners of forgotten dreams. But the ones that last, they live in the hands of the stubborn, in the hearts of those who refuse to let something broken stay buried. Charlotte didn't rebuild Willowhawk because she wanted glory. She did it because she saw beauty in the unfinished. She saw hope in a box of rusted bolts and blueprints scribbled in the margins of a life left behind. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. More true stories of grit and grace are on the way. Know someone chasing an unfinished dream. Share this with them, because second chances aren't found. They're built